So today we're going to look at competency-based interviews. But before we do that, I'm just going to talk you through the structure of today's workshop. So first of all, we're going to look at the types of interviews. There's different types of interviews you may be invited to. So we're just going to give you a quick overview of what that could look like. We're also going to talk about, I suppose, how do you prepare in advance for an interview? This is the most important part of the process. And as from a person who has conducted a lot of interviews, you can really tell the candidates who have put a lot of effort into the preparation for the interview. We're also going to look, I suppose, at the power of first impressions. This is really important stage and part of the interview process. Then I'm going to really focus in on what is a competency-based interview, what are competency-based questions, and then how do you answer competency-based interview questions. So that will take us, I suppose, just up to half an hour or a little bit more. I'm going to allow time at the end for any questions. So we'll just, I'll talk first, I'll go through all the slides, and if you have any questions, I'll open it up to you at the very end, okay? So first of all, I'm going to talk about, I suppose, the different types of interviews. And first one there on the screen is phone screening. This is normally done as the first part round of the interview process. And what I would say, or to be mindful about this, is you are missing all of the verbal or the non-verbal cues you'd normally get in a face-to-face interview. That's why it's really important in a phone interview that you listen really carefully to what's been said at the other side. Another thing to be mindful of in a telephone interview is you may ask for clarification. So have I answered your question correctly? Have I given you enough detail? They're really, really common on the market now. And if any of you are going to be going through the recruitment process, more than likely the first stage will be done over the telephone. Then there is the traditional type of interview. The market is moving away from this, but you may come up against this type of interview. And what it normally is the recruiter will have your CV. They will ask you questions based on your past work experience or your education. There's very little structure to the interview, and there's no formal structure. So each candidate could be asked very different questions. People and companies are moving away from that now, obviously, because you can't really score it in a consistent way. Next, we're going to look at video interviewing. This has really accelerated on the market, particularly the graduate market at the moment. This is where you will be invited to interview. You will be sent a link. You click on the link and you'll probably have 24 hours to 48 hours to complete the video interview. When you go into the link, you'll have to download an app. And you will be given, I suppose, a couple of practice questions to do before you go into the live video interview. Within the live video interview, you will be asked several questions, and you normally have between 1.5 minutes and 2 minutes to answer the questions. Feedback from candidates to date has been very mixed in relation to the video interviewing. So it's definitely something that I would gain more advice on or practice before I do it. And we're probably going to run a session actually on video interviews later on in this series, so watch out for that. Next is a group interview or assessment centre. This normally comes at the last stage or the final stage of the recruitment process, and it is where you work together in a group. You may have to do a particular task, you may have to discuss a topic, you may have to work as a group and make a presentation. Why recruitments and companies use this is because you get, I suppose, a better overview of the candidate. You get to see them in real life situations, you get to see what their team working skills are like, you get to see what their problem solving creativity. So it really does give you a good insight into the candidate. Next are panel interviews. These are more, I would say, popular or common within the public sector. You can have a panel, anything from 3 people up to 6 or 7 in the panel. They get very formal and sometimes can be very daunting. What I would say with the panel interview is a lot of people, the question is, who do I address my answer to? So what we would say in that is you obviously address your answer to the person who's asked you the question, but you need to be mindful to try and make eye contact with the rest of the panel as well. Also, there is lunch or dinner. So if you get contacted by somebody and say, oh, are you free to meet for a cup of coffee or lunch to discuss a certain particular role we have available, I would just treat that as an interview, okay? They are going to be at the lunch or dinner and they're going to be asking you questions and assessing your suitability for bringing you forward for that particular position. Strengths-based recruitment, it is new enough to the market. It's very common in the UK and becoming more so on the Irish market. It is really about, I suppose, matching your strengths to a particular job. So all of us have unique and innate strengths, and we are energized when we're using them. So recruiters and employers are trying to match what you're really good at with the particular job they have on offer. I think my colleague Patsy this morning spoke a little bit more about that, and that video is going up on YouTube. So if you're interested in hearing a little bit more about that, you can go onto our YouTube channel and watch that video. Also, there is informational or technical interviews. This is where they're going to assess your technical knowledge on something. So if you are an engineer, they may ask you to build a particular product. If you're a computer programmer, they may ask you to write some code. If you are a business studies student and you have a major in HR and you're applying for a job within HR, they may ask you questions in relation to employment law, similar to marketing. Every interview will have a component of a technical question. So that's assessing your knowledge in a particular topic. Then we're moving on to behavioural and competency-based interviews. So this is what we're going to focus on today. And just briefly, the theory on competency-based questions or behavioural questions is past behaviour is a predictor of future behaviour. But I'm going to go and talk about that in a little bit more detail later. First of all, I just want to discuss with you, why do recruiters hold interviews and what are they really trying to answer? So I suppose the first question they want to know, and they can more or less ascertain this from your application form or based on your previous work experience or your degree or your education, can you do the job? Okay, so it's probably a basic entry requirement around that. Then they're going to look at, will you do the job? So do you want the job? Are you motivated to the job? Okay. And then finally, which is the most important, and I think this is why recruitment is becoming more and more sophisticated. It takes a lot of money to go and find the right candidate for a role, bringing you into the organization, training you. It's normally probably 12 to 18 months before you're really fully trained and adding value to the organization. So it's really important to know, will you fit in and will you stay with the organization? Okay. So just bear that in mind when you're preparing for your interview. Layer it as 3. So what can I do the job? What are my qualifications? Do I want to do the job? And then I suppose, what is it about me that matches that particular organization? I've just noticed, I think somebody has their sound on. Would you mind turning off your audio, because it's just interfering with my microphone here? Okay, so next we are going to look at, well, what is the preparation do I need to do in advance for an interview? And as I said at the beginning of this workshop, it's really, really important that you do your homework in advance of the interview. It will make you more comfortable on the day, and it's really obvious to the people at the other side of the table, the candidates who've put in that additional time and prepared for the interview. So there is a few things I would like you to do in particular. First of all, is go back and get that job description. If you haven't been given a job description, or go back to the employer and you can ask the questions. You can say, look, I'm really looking forward to attending the interview. Can you let me know what type of interview it's going to be? Is there anything in particular I need to prepare? The job description I have is quite basic. Have you got a more detailed job description? You can ask these questions. What can they say is no, and and then you'll just have to work off of that. But I would say, once you get the job description, go in and highlight, well, what are the essential criteria and what are the desirable criteria? And it's a really good way of sort of knowing what are they looking for and what type of questions they're going to be asking on the day. Now, you can't predict every question they're going to ask. but you can prepare yourself for eventualities that they may ask. What is really, really important as well is doing your homework on the company. We engage in the career service with several graduate employers and co-op employers on an annual basis. And the biggest piece of feedback that comes back from all of our partners about the interview process is the lack of knowledge the student or graduate has about the company or the organisation. Okay. So I have listed some things here that you can sort of go and research, but what I would say, or the advice I would give, is go a little bit deeper. We can all go on the website and we can all find out the basics in relation to the products they produce, the history of the company, the number of employees. But if you really want to do good company research, Google the company, see what is or the issues or trends within that business organisation at the moment. I would suggest do a SWOT analysis. So what are the strengths and weaknesses and opportunities and threats for this particular company? What is their competitive advantage? Who are their competitors? A really good little trick to know as well is most big organizations will have an investor relations section within their website. If you go in there and you click in, you're able to see, well, their annual report. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to read the annual report from cover to cover, but there are certain points you may go in and pick out in relation to, well, what is the company strategy? What are the big things they want to achieve within 2020? What is their outlook for 2021? Also, just know what the share price of that organisation on the day you go for interview. As well, if you know somebody who works within the organisation, it's really good to have a conversation with them and see what do they know anything about the role? Can they share any information? They may know what the recruitment process is like. Okay. And I'll let you review the other questions you can ask here as well. And I suppose finally, before I move on from this, if you're coming out of college, you've recently done your undergrad or your master's, they would expect that you are sort of at the cutting edge of what's happening in the market at the moment. So be mindful that you know what the trends in the sectors are, what's best practice, what's innovation, what's coming down the line. Once you've sort of got a good understanding of that, I would say I'm really start preparing a list of questions. So I'm really into mind mapping. I think it's a really good way of preparing for an interview. So what I would do is pull all of the competencies I've highlighted from the job description. I would put them on a piece of paper, and from that I would start highlighting maybe examples of where you've demonstrated that particular skill in advance. So you should have a good long list of sort of examples that you can use in the interview. Really important as well is planning logistics and what to wear. You'll find out in the next slide, I suppose, the power of first impressions. So it's really important to be dressed appropriately for that particular interview. What I would say is some organizations are very informal, some are very formal. So it is really important that you do your research and you know what is considered to be normal in that practice. And if you don't know, I would go error in the side of dressing formally for the interview. Knowing where to go, parking, distance is really important. If any of you have ever come on campus at rush hour in the morning, you'll know that it takes a lot longer than maybe coming on at lunchtime. Okay, that could be a significant impact on you turning up late or not for your interview. And then finally, practice. Okay, so with an interview, you can contact us here in the career service. We're happy to do a mock interview with you, but talk your answers out loud. Speak your answers to somebody that knows you well. Ask for feedback. Record yourself. It's not very nice to listen to yourself back again, but you will really sort of improve your answers as well. Okay. So I'm going to move on to talking about next, I suppose, is the power of first impressions. I know that way back in the day when you were preparing for interview, I remember people telling me, oh no, it's really important that you get your handshake correct, that you're wearing the appropriate clothing and all of that. And now, since we're really working in a competency interview model, sometimes we forget about these and we really focus on, well, how are we going going to answer the questions? What type of examples are we going to use? And we sort of lose sight of the other stuff, okay? So at the end of the day, we're humans recruiting humans. A lot of organizations are very mindful, and they've brought in a lot of training around unconscious bias, but first impressions do last. So it's really important that you're dressed appropriately for that particular interview. But as well, it's really important that you practice how you're going to introduce yourself. I think research recently has shown that first impressions are formed. You would normally think, oh, maybe 5 minutes into the interview, but it's actually within 7 to 17 seconds of meeting somebody. And I often sit there and I think, oh God, what have I done within 7 to 17 seconds of meeting somebody? I've probably stood up and maybe handed my hand or put my hand out to shake their hand and maybe said my name, if even, okay? So it's really mindful, it's really powerful to look at these statistics. Also in the same research that was done, they surveyed over 2,000 managers and 33% of them claimed to know that they were going to hire somebody within 90 seconds of the interview. So the same scenarios, God, what have I done in 90 seconds? I probably sat down and introduced myself. So as well, it's really important just to be mindful of the tone of voice, the pace in which you answer the questions as well. It's just really interesting. And also within the same research that was done, the biggest and non-verbal mistake that most candidates make at interview is actually making eye contact as well. Okay, so it's really hard, and I appreciate interviews are really hard. You're stressed, you are trying to think about what you are saying, and now I'm adding a layer of, well, how are you saying it? But it's important, I suppose, to relax. Try and let your personality come out, and the more relaxed you are, the more engaging you are, the more passionate you are, and it's easier to make eye contact and just be, I suppose, treat the interview as being a conversation, but a conversation with a purpose. So I'm going to move on from that now. I could spend actually the whole session talking about first impressions, but I'm going to focus on competency-based interviews. Okay, so just to give you a background into competency-based interviewing, I had mentioned earlier that before it would have been very much based off of your CV. There was very little structure. Each candidate could be asked different questions. So as we become more sophisticated in our recruitment processes, obviously the first method, the traditional method, it's very hard to measure. And what are you measuring? Okay, so are you really recruiting the best candidate for the particular role? Probably not. And we are also working in an environment now where, I suppose, employment law governs us as well. So we have to prove when we hire somebody that we've been consistent with our recruitment process, and that it is very measurable, and we know why we've chosen this particular candidate. So this is where the whole idea of competency-based interviewing came on, and it's sort of looking for real life examples of past behaviour, as it will be a predictor of future behaviour. So when you are designing your job, you list out the particular skills and competencies the candidate has to have, or in order for them to be able to do the job, and then you need to assess that in the interview. So that's sort of the background of it. If you haven't, I suppose, thought about the different skills or competencies in advance of the interview, it can be a very uncomfortable place to be, because you could be asked questions such as, can you give me an example of a time where you've shown leadership on a particular project you were working? Give me an example of a time where you had to make a difficult decision. Give me an example of where you worked as part of a team, showed initiative, maybe working with a difficult colleague. You had to change your plans last minute, overcome a difficult obstacle, refuse to compromise, and work with others to solve problems. Okay, so when you're nervous and you're being asked these questions, it can be really hard to think on the spot of examples. Therefore, it's really important that you do your preparation in advance. So do that mind map. Okay, if you can tell from the job description, they really want somebody who's got excellent communication skills, who is able to work as part part of a team, has experience of project managing, has the ability to show leadership. What I would do is put those in my bubble and then write out 3 examples of where in the past I have demonstrated that particular skill. So where, give me a real life example of that. And it's really important that it's a real life example. It can be very simplistic and effective in your answer, but I think if you start making up stories, particularly in the interview, and the interviewer starts probing a little bit deeper and looking for more detail, then it can all really unravel. Okay, so that is the types of questions, that's the background on competency-based interviewing. But I know you're all here going, that's really good, Anne, but how do I actually answer the questions? So what we would, there's several ways you can do it, but from our experience within the career service and the rest of the team here, we really believe that the STAR model is really the most effective way of answering these competency-based questions. And from somebody who has sat at the other side of the table for a lot of my life, I'm expecting the answer actually to come with using this structure, okay? Because it's really easy to understand, and it's sort of bullet pointing me the whole way down in the story. What I would say about the STAR technique as well, or competency-based interviews, is sometimes people have a tendency to get lost in the story, okay? They'll start and they'll get to the end, and then they'll start to look at you and go, have I answered the question? And you're probably going, no, not really. So by using the STAR technique, you really are answering the question in a very structured way. Another thing to be mindful of with competency-based interviews is sometimes people pick, I suppose, if I was in this scenario, this is how I would approach it. And that's not correct, okay? You have to give an example of, this is what happened, this was the situation, this is the action I took, this is the result. So you really have to give real life examples. Also, watch out with competency-based interviews is not using the word I, so saying we did this, we did that. It's really important because they're asking what action did you take, and it's you in particular, so that's really important. So you need to use the word I. Take ownership of it. I know we're probably not used to doing that, but in this particular circumstance, it's really, really important. So I'm just going to talk you through the technique here. So using the STAR technique, I would say sometimes the S and the T go together. So you describe the situation and the specific task you were faced with. So very much painting the picture, the when, the where, and the with whom. Okay, so if you were painting a picture, it would be the background. I don't need to know absolutely everything about it, but I need to know certain information. So when was it, how big the project was, how many people you're working with, maybe the gravitas of the particular project, if it was time bound. Just give me a good sense of the project. Then you're going to talk about the action. So the how, what action did you take? So if you're talking about project management, so how did you ensure that you got the project finished in the right time, to the right standard? Talk me through the steps you took in order to make that happen. Then finally, you're going to talk about, well, what results did you get? Did you meet the deadline? Was the project successful? How was the teamwork? Okay, so conclusion did you reach? And finally, this doesn't normally come part of the STAR process, but I think it's really important, is the reflection. So what did you learn? What would you do better? Okay, so sometimes not all of our stories are going to be I suppose happy endings. Sometimes our biggest learnings or our biggest examples are, you know, when things went wrong. So it's really important you add that reflection in. So what did I learn from that particular situation? And then if you can prove and said, well, when I was in a similar situation again, this is the corrective action we took in order to mitigate from that happening again. Okay. This is, I suppose, I would say is the best way to answer the competency-based questions. Also, before I move off of this slide, I really want to highlight that from my experiences, a lot of people, let's say, give 60 to 70% of their answer talking about the situation and the task, and maybe 30 to 20% talking about the action and the result. That needs to be flipped. It's really important that you highlight the action and result. That's the main part of the question. It is really important that you actually able to gauge the interviewer as well. Some interviewers will ask for clarification and will probe a little bit further. Some people won't. So make sure when you're giving your answer that it's a complete answer, okay? And that they can, and you've said everything that you want to say about it, because if they don't go back in and probe, you won't get the opportunity to add more detail to that particular answer. Okay, so that is, I'm going to leave that now because that is very much how you would answer competency-based questions. I'm going to go on to the last slide here, and it's very much some sample questions that you could get. So if they were assessing your ability to work under pressure, they may ask you, can you tell me about a time when you had to cope with a strict deadline or time demands or work under pressure? Teamwork, tell me about a time when you contributed to the successful working of a team. Initiative, describe the last time you had to make a spur of the moment decision to improve a process. Customer service, tell me about a time you need to deal with a difficult customer. Client, communication skills, when you have had to use communications to explain or clarify something to a colleague. Problem solving, tell me about a time when you had to identify the key cause of a problem and implement a solution. What I would say is you can find lots of competency-based questions on the internet. I think the UL actually website has a really good handbook on a list of competency-based questions. So you'll be able to find loads. I think yours is to be able to narrow it down and focus on the important ones and have enough examples. And what I would say as well, when you're choosing your examples, show the full picture of who you are. So just don't focus on your education or just don't focus on your work experience. Use different examples from your education, your work experience, maybe your community or voluntary work, maybe your sports. It can highlight it as well. You want to show the full picture of who you are on the day.